So in the initial film that I made about this, the world's oldest synthesizer of the human voice, I showed you a D major scale, which was a scale just using the middle two strings with the default finger positions that you get on the violin. So your first finger, second finger, and third finger, which comes right next to the second one there. And it's the same on both strings. So we had this. Remembering to keep the bow moving at a constant rate gets you those pure notes instead of... So allow the bow to move freely but reasonably lightly across the strings. And try and make the volume so that it doesn't have this sort of swell in the middle. Try and make it a constant volume wherever you are on the bow. Just so you've got real control over that sound. Now, there are 12 major keys. I've just played you D major. Now, if you have a iOS device, you can check that your pitch is correct by just opening the piano sound that you have free with any of these, like GarageBand for example. So I've got a piano sound here. Don't worry too much about the theory. You notice I started using black notes here. Now the spacing between the notes is always the same regardless of where you start. So we had a step to start with. There's your step. Then another step, which is the black note. A step is 2 half steps. And every time you go up a note on the piano, you're going up in half steps. So we had a step, and then a step, then our half step there, then another step, another step, another step, and then a half step to finish, which brings you back to the same note on the piano. You can see the one between the 2 black notes here. So it is useful to be able to see this in diagrammatic form because it kind of helps you out with what's going on the violin. With the violin fingerboard, there are no markings. So you have to think in obviously using your ear, but it does help to start introducing the theory with the piano. So you can start this time. I'm going to start on the G, the open G here. And I'm going to play another scale which sounds roughly the same, just a bit lower. And there's my same fingering that I had for the D major scale. I do use 1, 2 and 3, then the next string, open 1, 2 and 3, like that. Now I can keep going. I can play another, what's called an octave, the distance between this note and this one. They sound the same, it's just one's higher than the other. So I can keep going now. I can start my first octave. Now, the fingering on these 2 strings was a bit different. 1 and 3 are in the same place, but 2, instead of being there, moves down towards the first finger. Notice that the third finger shouldn't move, so you've got to be able to use your fingers and place them independently on the violin fingerboard. So I'll just play that again for you. 0, 1, 2, 3. 0, 1, 2, 3. 0, 1, low 2, 3. Then 0, 1, low 2. Low meaning that the pitch, the finger, is more that way. You can get high fingers as well. For example, if I started on A, you can see that my third finger has actually come away from the second finger. But let's stick with G major for the moment, because if I've got this 2 octave scale that I've just played you, finishing on that note there, you can start to play tunes. So there's Auld Lang Syne. It was more than an octave's range there, so I needed to be able to play that scale in 2 octaves to be able to get that tune to work. So notice also that you can, instead of, for example, if I go like this, I'm having to change from one string to the other. And you're always going to get those awkward sort of shifts with the string and the bowing. Now what you can do is you can use your 4th finger. Now if I do this, by default the 4th finger should be the same note as the open string that's next to it. Like that. So if I play that same section, those 3 notes, la la la, we're on the same string instead of... Also, the open strings can be slightly unpredictable with their sound. Because the string is against a hard piece of ebony, that's why the open strings sound different to when you use your fingers. The 4th finger here is a little bit softer sounding, and therefore it goes with the other fingers as well. That sticks out. So open strings should be avoided if you're playing longer notes. Of course, they're useful for shorter notes or shorter runs that you're doing. That's much easier. Now, that's a bit about the G major scale, and you can start to work out tunes that work in that, Happy Birthday. There we go, and I also use my 4th finger there to avoid that open string problem. So it is worth, once you've played the scale, to think of tunes, that everyday tunes, Happy Birthday or Auld Lang Syne or Christmas carols or whatever. Now, of course, you're watching this in June, it'll obviously have to be something different. So that is the G major scale. Now, other scales, start any note that you start on, those gaps, you remember those steps and half steps, have to be maintained. So, for example, if I start on A, I've got my step first, then another step, then a half step. But I could use the open string. Step, 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 half step. So I come to rest on that top note, which is the same as my first one. It's important to realise that those 2 notes, they are both A. One's just slightly higher than the other, and this one is even higher still. That one's quite a lot higher. So there is quite a range up here on the violin. I said before that this was a human voice synthesizer. Well, it's a human voice synthesizer all the way up here if you're Minnie Riperton. But most sopranos can sort of get up to about there, a C or a D. So you've got a few other, quite a lot more up here. There's the D above. Now, because the notes get closer together, you've got to even a slight adjustment of the finger. I can get a half step by literally just turning my finger like that. Best avoid that bit for now. Just get used to those fingers working in the lower ranges of the violin. Now, as I showed you just now on the piano, we had I played all the half steps on the piano, all the possible notes. You can do that on the violin as well. If I show you what's called a chromatic scale, you can see that the notes, there are notes in between all of the major scale ones. So for example, going back to D major, I can get a low first, which is there. It's halfway between my first finger and where the open string is. And then I can get low second and normal second, third and high third. I actually use my low 4 there. But you can go low first, first, second, sorry, low second, second, third, high third, then you're on the next string. Then you can do the same thing again. So there are 12 notes in that octave. That's how the Western music system works. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then you start at the first one again. Some people think there are 13, but because these two notes are the same, you can forget that one as being the 13th. It's actually the first again. And there are all the possible notes between this D and this D. So it's a sort of bluesy. So I went on to the other string, but it's important to realise that these fingers have a couple of notes each that they cover. So there is the D chromatic scale. It's slightly more abstract than something that like Happy Birthday, which is more tuneful. But it's important to be aware of those notes. So I can start a scale on any note and maintain those gaps. If I start on a C, use the open strings for now, because actually they help you on your way. If you're coming slightly out of tune, you can hear it when you go on to the next open string. If it doesn't sound quite right, it means the notes that were fingered on the fingerboard here will be slightly out. You can also, if you want to know if your third finger on the D string is right, because it's the same note as the open G there, you can compare the two. Sounds like a plane sort of diving. So you want the beating between those two notes to stop. And there they are. So they are pure. It's called a perfect interval. And there are only 3 perfect intervals. There's one that does this, and one that does this, between 2 open strings on the violin. It sounds quite pure and very sort of majestic. And there's another one called the perfect fourth. So it's actually, you can tune various other notes on the violin with the open string, and if they sound pure, then you've got a perfect interval. And it's just working your way around the violin as a sort of geographical setup, really. So there's been no music reading up until now, and no sort of music theory in terms of sharps and flats and all that sort of thing. Simply use your ear to work out whether those notes that you're playing form the tune that you want to play. So anything, I don't know, Let It Be by the Beatles. Something like that, or once you get to playing things in G and D majors, which use a lot of the open strings, then you can start to work out how you can get those same gaps wherever you start. So B flat major. There's There's lots of adjustments that you need to make, but whichever note you start on, you can work out those finger positions in terms of steps and half steps. So in the next video, I'm going to go through improvising. So you've got your scale and you can just make up little things that work using that scale, and it just gets you creating as well as using your ear to resolve tunes.